Judge Andrew Napolitano is our guest for the rest of the hour, rest of the broadcast. I want to say congratulations. He's going to be starting in the next few months his show on the Fox Business TV network. That'll definitely get the highest ratings on that channel because he is a constitutionalist. And I agree with Judge Andrew Napolitano on almost every issue. In fact, I've never really found anything I disagree with him on, but it caused quite a stir this week. I'm sure most of you know about it. We played a clip of it at the start of the show earlier today where he said, look, the federal government's courts are going to find this unconstitutional. And that is one of the powers the federal government has, one of the three powers. And, of course, he's a former federal judge, constitutional law scholar. And he's saying that this is going to turn off Hispanics to the Republican Party. My issue is I've seen the Gallup polls as high as 80% of Hispanic Americans want to control the borders because they know it's driving down wages. I mean, there's 6+ billion people that want to come here. And if we didn't have the big welfare system that would bankrupt us, then I would be for the type of totally open immigration we had 100 years ago. But even 100 years ago, those numbers per capita are much smaller than they are now. But here to talk about this out of the gates is Judge Andrew Napolitano. Judge, good to have you here with us.
Oh, Alex, it's always a pleasure. Now you can say that there isn't anything that we disagree on because that's the key, is the social benefit welfare system we have here, which draws good, hardworking people but lazy people that want the government to take care of them cradle to grave. In the break, we were talking about how my grandparents came here. I mean, they came here, they registered at Ellis Island, they got the vaccinations to make sure they didn't have any communicable diseases, and that was it. They didn't have to meet a quota. They went to school, they learned English, they became productive members of society. They didn't have to carry any ID. They became citizens as children when their parents became citizens. But that was before the dictatorship of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, which, of course, established changed the relationship of the federal government to individuals by taxing from A to give to B. I always like to tell this story. You knock at there's a knock on your door. You open the door. There's a guy with a gun, and the guy says, "Give me your money. I want to distribute it to other people. I want to be charitable in your name." You call the police. You find out he is the police. I mean, that's basically what the government does. You can't be charitable with other people's money. You can only be charitable with your own. But it forces us to give money away to people that we would choose not to give it away. There's no authority for that in the Constitution. FDR cowed the Supreme Court. FDR used all kinds of political favors to get a Democratic Congress to start giving money away, and every president since then, even Ronald Reagan, added to that. The worst, of course, was LBJ. As a result, you could come here legally or illegally and be taken care of cradle to grave by the federal government. That's what draws people here. Now, back to what you talked about. Yes, I was on with Neil Cavuto talking about whether or not Governor Blagojevich can subpoena the president. Answer, yes, and I hope he does. I would love to see the president under oath in a federal courtroom in Chicago explaining how the corrupt system of Democratic politics, probably Republican politics as well, but here it's Democratic under scrutiny, works. As sort of a throwaway question, meaning we had about 40 seconds left, Neil says to me, by the way, Judge, Governor Brewer just signed this piece of legislation in Arizona. What do you think about it? And, of course, I said, you know, I believe in state sovereignty. I believe in state sovereignty so much that I think that the states can take back the agreement they made with the federal government, that they can nullify what the federal government does, that they can secede from the union. However, the one legitimate power that the feds do have is the power to regulate foreign affairs and to regulate foreign people. And the state of Arizona doesn't have any power there. Moreover, the state of Arizona does not have the power to say to its cops, you can stop people on the basis of the way they look and ask them to prove a negative on the spot. The negative is that they're not here illegally. We fought a Cold War against countries in Eastern Europe that thought they had the power to stop people on the basis of the way they looked and demand to see their papers. If this law is enforced, a federal judge might say, you know what, Alex, it's unfair to only make the immigrants carry ID cards. So the only way to do this, here's the slippery slope, is for everybody to carry ID cards. You think I'm making this up?
But Judge, let me interject. But that's not the slippery slope. That's indeed what's happening, as you know.
Exactly.
Obama and Bush's amnesty plan makes everybody have a worker ID card and basically just legalizes all the illegals. So I go back to the previous point. if people come across the border an hour before their water breaks, everything's paid for, the kid becomes a citizen, the parents are there, I've got to pay for it. In a democracy, two wolves and a sheep voting on what's for dinner, this is a giant voting bloc that generally votes to take my guns, take my private property, and make me their slave. They're being used as a client of the big federal government.
Exactly. I agree with everything.
So what do we do then? What do we do when the feds won't carry out one of their only legitimate powers? Doesn't it fall back to the 9th and 10th Amendment that the states are, I mean, I guess the legitimate way would be then for Arizona to secede?
Yes, that would be the constitutional way for Arizona to do it. The better way would be to elect a federal government willing to enforce federal law. And here's the conundrum, Alex. From Ronald Reagan to Barack Obama, from a conservative Republican to a liberal Democrat, everything in between, the two Bushes, Clinton and Carter, no American president since Richard Nixon has been willing to enforce the immigration laws. I'll repeat it. No American president since Richard Nixon has been willing to enforce the immigration laws. And every American president since Richard Nixon has added to the social safety net for people who can't work or don't want to work or
yeah,
want to
your
be taken care
grandparents
of by
didn't
the
get
government.
any welfare. They broke their back to build the country.
Correct. The welfare started with FDR, and every president has made it worse. So this is not a problem that can be resolved by interfering with constitutional liberty. I love the idea of hardworking people coming here and experiencing and enjoying the American dream. But I do not love interfering with their constitutional liberties and mine, because if they can stop somebody on the basis of the way they look, which the Constitution prohibits, in order to find out if they're here legally, then they could stop somebody on the basis of the way they look to find out
and
if
we
they
know
ate
they've been
too
using
much salt or ate too much sugar or whatever else the government wants to regulate.
Sure, but and we know these checkpoints 50, 75 miles in all over the country, even in places like Vermont and Maine, they are using it to harass citizens, and they let the illegals go right through. So we know that all these things you're warning about are actually already manifesting themselves. So here's the big question. Looking at the legislation, the way I see it, it says if they have suspicion, probable cause, you see 10 guys at a day labor site piling into the back of a truck, then you can pull them over. Or if you pull somebody over who's swerving and they don't have IDs, and you arrest them for drunk driving, they can now be deported when it's proven that they're an illegal. I mean, what was Arizona thinking? If you're saying, and I respect you, that you've read the bill as a constitutional law scholar, and you're saying you believe it's unconstitutional, then what should they have crafted? Because Texas is about to get on board, according to NBC, and other states are flocking to do this.
They should curtail the social benefits that they provide. But in fairness to Arizona, this is all part of the big problem that you and I talk about all the time, which is the micromanagement of all government by the federal government. Much of what Arizona spends on social welfare is mandated by the federal government. They have no choice but to do it. The only way not to do it would be to nullify the federal law, or to secede from the union, or to persuade the electorate to elect people to Congress that will get rid of the social welfare state that actually started with Abraham Lincoln, but in a direct way with Franklin Roosevelt. Now, that's not going to happen overnight, but I got to say two things. One, I did not know about the internal checkpoints 50 miles in until you told me about that, and it is my job to know these things. So I am deeply grateful to you for that. My great fear is that this immigration issue in Arizona will be used by people like Chuck Schumer and Lindsey Graham, and I'm not just picking them out of the blue. They've proposed the legislation which basically says, all these immigrants, legal and illegal, they have to have an ID card. But since the federal courts won't let us discriminate between Americans and immigrants, we're going to make everybody have an ID card. So you can't do anything without showing that ID card. Then East Germany is here, and maybe even the antebellum South. Why do I say that? Because this Arizona law lets you stop people on the basis of the way they look. Now, you know what I look like, Alex. If I don't shave for 2 days and I fall asleep in the sun and I wake up in Phoenix, they're going to stop me.
And that's not going to be fun. That's going to create a lot of angry people.
Be fun. I'm making fun of myself and my own looks. But we live in a society where the government can't do that, where the government can't demand your papers, where the police can't stop you unless they have objective evidence of crime called probable cause, or a search warrant signed by a judge to whom they presented probable cause.
Well, let me tell you a story. Driving around in his Monte Carlo, he's been dead for years. My grandfather was out in the Texas Hill Country, 200-plus miles from the border. He was pulled over by the Border Patrol, and I'm going to print the article and I'll give you the name of it right now, but it's up on screen. But yes, sir, there is a 100-mile, but they normally only go in 75, buffer zone around the entire country. It's an internal border, 100 miles in, and it's basically a Constitution-free zone, is what the ACLU calls it.
I agree with the ACLU, and from the reports of it that I have learned about, because of your exposure of it, you are correct. It is patently unconstitutional. It may not exist, and I'm waiting for a federal judge to comply with his or her oath to uphold the Constitution and invalidate it.